We've come a long way in our reading of this story of God's good news to humanity. From the fall of Adam and Eve to the deliverance of Israel from captivity, to the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, and on to the pouring out of the Holy Spirit and our place in this great commission to the world. It's an amazing story, and we find ourselves right in the middle of it, a reader, but also participants. But there's something we need to be clear about. Not everyone is willing to say it, but if you read the Bible's story, it's unavoidable. Following Jesus comes with a cost. You can see it in the lives of those first men and women who gave their lives for the sake of Jesus and his gospel. And you can hear it in Jesus' words to those who seek to follow him. If any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way, take up your cross, and follow me. To follow Jesus is always to bear a cross. But as is also so often true of the biblical story, by God's grace, what seems at first to be our loss is actually our gain. The story of the early church is really two stories. The story of the gospel's miraculous spread throughout the world, and the story of how God's people proved themselves faithful through loss and suffering to proclaim that good news. It is a story of the struggle and success, a story of suffering and joy. It is a story of loss that is gain. There's a story in the book of Acts about how Paul and his companion Silas ended up in prison for their faithful obedience to Christ. They had been preaching Jesus and doing miracles when a crowd drugged them before city officials and accused them of advocating for unlawful practices against Rome. There was no trial or witnesses. Though Paul was a Roman citizen, nonetheless, they stripped them and beat them with rods and placed them in the prison stocks. What about Paul's rights as a Roman citizen? What about this injustice? It was all wrong. Paul and Silas had every reason to be frustrated and immediately demand a better way. But Acts tells us that Paul and Silas spent the night praying and singing hymns in their prison cell. The other prisoners listened, I'm sure perplexed by this strange sense of joy in the midst of such hardship. Who worships in prison chains? That night an earthquake shook the prison, and Paul and Silas' cell door was broken open. Their chains fell off. What a miracle. It was their chance to escape. The prison guard awoke to find the doors open, and he drew his sword to kill himself. It was his duty to ensure the prisoners didn't escape. This failure would be too much public shame, and likely he would be punished with death. He decided to save himself the embarrassment. Just as he was about to carry out the act, Paul spoke up from his prison cell. "Stop. Don't kill yourself. We are all here." Why hadn't they run? Why were they still sitting in an unlocked prison cell? The jailer called for lights and ran to the dungeon and fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. Then he brought them out and asked, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" Paul and Silas had a chance to escape, but they didn't take it. They stayed to save the life of the man who had locked them in that cell. Because of their sacrifice, that guard and his whole family came to know Christ. The strange way these men embraced suffering had made the gospel's good news brilliantly clear. Paul and Silas were eventually released and asked to leave town, but the testimony of that prison official stayed. They had left a mark on that town. It had cost them something, but the reward was eternal. You see, Christianity is not some life hack for getting more out of life or escaping difficult situations. We don't believe simply so things can go more smoothly. Christianity is an entirely new way of looking at the world and suffering, a way that measures the costs and rewards of this world completely differently. Your faith and obedience will cost you something too. It always does. But those who are willing to pay that cost find something they never could have on their own. As Jesus had also told his disciples, if you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. Try to protect your life, and you will reap only frustration and heartbreak. But learn to lose your life for the sake of Christ, the one who has already given his life for you, and you will find something far better. You will find the very life you couldn't protect. We pay this cost by faith and hope. Having seen what Jesus paid to redeem our lives, we lay it down again for his sake, knowing and trusting that what he has given us is far greater than what can be taken from us. So we lose even our life, so that we might find it anew and better in him. Listen.